I think we're very lucky to be setting off this series, this occasional series, I think we can say, this series of getting people to talk about their business, how they do it, what they think of it, and how it's changed or whatever in their time. And I can think of no one better than Nick to do this. Please welcome Nick Knight. Do you want some water or anything?
Oh, I'm okay at the moment.
This is just so you can all have a good look at him before he starts. See all about this marvellous man. Right, so, Nick, let's begin at the beginning and ask you, when did you first think that you would want to be a photographer? When you were at school or when you were at college or what?
No, it was when I was at school. That was back in the 1970s. Photography was a very different beast then. It wasn't at all like it is now. Cameras were much less widespread, so the family would have a camera. So my father had a camera, which I borrowed. And it was really a couple of things. One, it was a sort of realization that the course that I was on, which was sort of heading towards the idea that I was going to be a doctor and was going to study medicine. That was a vague thought. Anyway, so that was where I was on. I was really not enjoying it. This was starting my A-level, finishing my A-levels. And the other thing was the sort of realization that all the art students looked a lot more interesting than the science students. I thought, well, maybe I'm in the wrong place here. It took a while for the penny to drop, because I still ended up at university studying science. But anyway, but then I took up the camera really just a social thing. It's a very good way of, how to put it and sound intelligent, just a very good way of socializing.
Yes. It's a very good way of making friends and being nosy as well, of course.
Yes, but it gives you a license to do whatever you want,
yes,
really. It is the one thing. It is a passport to walk up to anybody in the street and just say, can I take your photograph? And most people say yes. And that gives you a way into any situation. Absolutely. And that's how I've used it. I've used it completely over the last 30 or so years to follow all of my dreams, to follow any of my desires. So if I want to know about anything, whether it's Sèvres porcelain, or whether it's miners coming off shift, or whether it's heroin addicts, or whatever it is, I have a reason to do that, because I'm a photographer. Well, I was a photographer.
Why do you say was?
Oh, it's a long thing, but it's all semantics, really. I was a photographer, and what I did was defined by a set of very clear parameters. And that was true up until, well, sort of about mid-90s, I guess. And then I realized that nearly all the parameters that defined what I did as a photographer no longer applied. So really I was working with another medium. And things like the iPhones and the cameras we work on now don't really obey any of the parameters of what used to be called photography. So to keep on calling it photography just limits what we do now. So for some time now I've been slightly annoyingly saying I'm not a photographer, which of course people don't really understand, and I haven't got a good word to offer up. So you're a what then? Well, I'm a image maker, which sounds really fey. I'm a generalist. Yeah. That's the latest one.
A generalist.
A generalist. I was working, I was doing Kanye West's Black Skinhead video, which is all CGI. And I asked one of the people I was working with who was sort of creating this body, I said, oh, so if I had to employ you, what would I say you did? He said, oh, I'm a generalist. So I thought, oh, I quite like that. Generalist. That's great. It's sort of got the word general in it, and that sounds quite good.
Yes.
But so I don't really know what I am anymore. This is sort of more or less the sort of upshot of all of that. I was a photographer. What I do doesn't really apply to photography anymore. And I think photography really isn't what any of us do anymore. I don't know what do you teach photography here?
Yeah, we have fashion photography courses.
And do you teach the old school of photography? Do you teach negatives and transparencies?
No, we have all of that, and I think that but also the role of the digital. And I think, but what I was also interested was the idea of fashion or the film, because if it's not, are the same problems around film, because we again on our camera phones, we're able to do the video and post that up and edit it on our laptop or whatever. So I'm quite interested in a way how so many of the key disciplines as we understand them are being eroded. Now, what does that mean for us teaching, but also what does it mean as a practitioner? So would you say the same?
I don't know. I don't know why people teach photography anymore. It seems to me a strange thing to do. I mean, image making, yes, I understand, but I don't understand why you teach somebody what a negative is,
I mean, obviously, but it's in the context of understanding how you apply it. So all of the students will be making films. I can't think of any show that I've seen.
Well, we find if it's relevant, if the students feel it's relevant.
But I think in a way I sometimes see
I never use it. I never use photography anymore. I never have a camera that has negative in the back of it or transparency.
No, I mean, we don't.
Any of those things.
There are students who will go back to that and perhaps use pinhole, and we had all of those sorts of things.
Why would you?
Well, I think it's because it's about an inquiry, and in a way, I think it's also about if you're a dancer, you've understood sort of all the steps and can be sort of allowed to experiment and to challenge things. So I think there's something about being a student which is not about...
I don't agree, but I won't get to it. I won't call you on it because I think it's different from being a dancer and learning the basic steps. I don't think you have to learn about reciprocity failure or the zone system to be able to pick that up.
I've got no idea whether, I have to say, whether the students learn about that.
I spent years learning about reciprocity failure and the zone system.
But are you sure you're not sort of being wise after the event, as it were? I mean, would you be where you are now if you hadn't done the traditional course?
Well, I had to do the traditional course because at that time I was a photographer and photography was the medium of
I mean
practice.
when you went to college, when you switched from the possibility of being a doctor and you went to do... Did you do photography or did you do something broader?
No, I did photography.
And photography was
they didn't know what to do with me. I was arrived in the photography department and I started painting on the negatives. They said, oh, perhaps you should be in the graphics department. I said, no, I'm quite lucky, I'll stay here. So it was really, I didn't fit right from the beginning, to be honest.
So really you were subverting the medium right at the very beginning if you were painting on the negatives.
Yes, because I wasn't doing it to subvert it. I was doing it because I liked the work of people like Maholi Nagy and the Russian constructivists. And I always loved typography and photography mixed together. I always loved photography of meaning. That's why I loved magazines. I loved big sort of, advertising hoardings. That's where I felt photography lived. I never particularly felt it lived in the gallery. I felt it was the people's medium and therefore should be used, as the people's voice. I mean, that's sort of, that's how I always saw photography. And I actually just visually liked it combined with text. As
many of you will know, or probably all of you will know, you did a marvellous little book called Skinheads. That was when you were very young.
Oh, good.
How
yes.
did that come about? Were you still a student then, or
yes, it was in the crossover period from when I dropped out of medical college and went to art college. And I dropped out. I was asked to leave because my exam results weren't so great.
All the best people.
Yeah, so sometime in May I became unemployed, and I worked at an off-licence called Oddbins on the King's Road. And it coincided with a particular love I had, which was my memory from the early 1970s of the first wave of skinheads, and mostly my next-door neighbour Penny, who I particularly liked, who was older than me, had nothing to do with me at all, but I liked her a lot as she was a skinhead, and it had a sort of romantic notion for me. And it was against every value that I had instilled in me. I was brought up by a very loving mother and a very loving father, both very educated. And it's that part where you just refuse everything. It's that, what's it called, rites of passage. And I think we all impose different rites of passage on ourselves. It's a moment where a child becomes an adult, and I guess looking back on it, it's easier to say now that was my rites of passage, where I put myself in situations where I really shouldn't have been in, and exposed myself to things I really probably shouldn't have seen or been part of. But it was a way of finding out who I was.
What sort of things?
I thought it was a way of going out with girls I like the look of.
Oh, right.
But now, 40 years later, I can see it as much more deep than that.
Of course. But what sort of things did you find that you were doing which perhaps your parents might have thought were rather transgressive and not really what you should be?
I quite like being transgressive.
I think you've probably been transgressive all your life. All creators are. But, earlier you said that photography was your way of getting into places where you couldn't normally go.
Yes.
How did the skinheads... I mean, I can't imagine you were a skinhead. Maybe you were.
Oh, it was lovely. Yeah, I was a very nice skinhead.
You'd
have liked me, yeah. No, Colin, I was 18, 19 at the time. It was fine. I basically, just followed my nose. I've approached people I met in the street and fell into a scene and photographed a scene I was in. But it's that thing, it's a sort of late teenage thing where you just think, who am I? And I don't want to be anything that I was before, and I reject every value that everybody's ever told me, and you find out then who you are and what you're made of.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The 70s were great for all those sorts of things. I grew up, I'm 54, so I was sort of about 10 at the beginning and 20 at the end. So I grew up all the way through the end of the first kind of skinheads, the end of hippies, the beginning of glam rock, punk, northern soul, neuromantics. I mean, everything. The Blitz comes a little
The
bit
works, the lot.
all the sort of the
Yeah.
big sort of youth cult moment is what I grew up through, and so I had every look going throughout the 70s.
So do you think it was also with the skinheads? I mean, obviously there was the whole culture around that, but the look was so much.
The look was a particular reaction against the early part of my growing up, was I thought I really should be somebody totally more romantic and much more kind of, I sort of based the whole thing on sort of characters like Tadzio out of Death in Venice, a sort of beautiful boy. When I was 14, that's what I wanted to be. So I had a white sailor suit, and I had my hair permed, and I used to wear nail varnish, and it was great, and get beaten up.
Did anyone photograph you at that time?
No, sadly
what
not.
A pity.
Sadly not.
What a
Well,
pity.
luckily not. But it was a good way of drawing attention to yourself. It was a good way of getting on the bus. I used to live in the provinces between sort of Cambridge and Peterborough. And you got on the bus looking like that, and immediately you got some attention.
So it
was a way
so
of
the image was always there, wasn't it?
The image was always there, and it was
yeah.
always a way. And I think, because I've been studying punk for the Met and now recently for SHOWstudio for the last year or so, and it is interesting to see how people use the fashion to basically to proclaim an identity, to proclaim a belonging, a right to be on this planet, a right to be here. And people have done it in different ways. And throughout my early teenage years, I certainly proclaimed my right to be here. And then afterwards I flipped that and I went into conformist mode and proclaimed my right almost not to be here, to be recognised as a symbol and not as a person.
And do you think that proclaiming through your identity is there in the same way now?
He said in this blue suit.
No, I mean not necessarily just for you, but also
do you mean
culturally.
now,
because I mean, in a way, you just had a roll call of,
be.
as you say, glam rock, skinheads.
I think, well, we go on to sort of a slightly broader point. I think fashion is probably, I think, A, it's the greatest art form. I also think it's something that's accessible to all of us. It's the one way that we always express who we are, even if we're deciding to express who we're not. I mean, my father, who would never think of himself as in any way fashionable, was very fashionable by that token. Had a particular set of clothes he would wear, and he would wear nothing else because they were not fashionable. So I think it's always that thing. There's never really been a society since we've been a species that has not used fashion in some way or dressing in some way to proclaim sexual availability, political orientation, position in society, all those sorts of things.
What do you proclaim by wearing a suit? I've never seen you in anything but a suit, and always a black one. What is your proclamation for your dress?
I think it's, I like how it looks. It's a very 60s suit, which of course goes back to sort of, I think we all probably have cultural heroes that we like, that become our sort of, our checklist stylistically. Also, it was sort of useful to me not that I would look the way people didn't think I'd look. I quite liked the fact I look a lot straighter than people might think. I didn't want to look like what people might imagine a fashion photographer would look like. I didn't want to adopt any of those sort of keys or styles. So I quite liked the way that people would, they don't expect me to look like this, so I quite like that. And also I quite like looking like this. To be honest, you have a suit, these are all made by Kilgar. If you have a suit made on Savile Row, it's a very nice thing. It's like having a car designed for you or a house made for you or whatever it is. It's an incredible luxury to have somebody measure your every part of your body and see how you stand and the weight's more on the left hip and all that sort of thing, and change a piece of clothing so it fits you. That's a luxury.
But you never change the style or the proportion?
I tend to stick to single-breasted. Yes, I tend to. It's been slightly, I mean, it's a slightly sort of mod thing in any case.
Yes.
But I start this way. To be honest, Colin, I don't always wear a suit. When I'm in the studio, I'll wear a pair of 505s and a pair of these black brogues and this white shirt, which is made by a shirt maker called Frank Foster, who's a very good old-school shirt maker. And that's become a uniform. And that's because if you go in the studio, every time I take a picture, I probably go down on one knee to take a picture. And then you've got white Martian paint on your knees. So if you do it in a suit, you've just suit.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, in addition to Francis and I asking questions, we've had quite an interesting lot of questions from the audience. And so we're going to sort of break it up as we go along to give you some of these. This is from someone called Ashley Evans, who says, do you see it as a positive or as a negative that digital is taking over the printed image?
Yes, I see it as a positive. It's a huge subject, to be honest, which I'll try and be succinct about. Yes, I see it as a positive because really it's not about the medium. I never wanted to be called a photographer because I didn't like being defined by the medium I use. And I see the digital, the whole way digital has become every part of our life, It's sort of freed us up. You know, it's like having more toys. You know, when I had a camera, I had, you know, a certain amount of lenses for it. Now I've got 1,000 lenses for it. Now I can do things on that iPhone that I could not have considered before. I mean, literally, there's an app that's just come out called Megaphoto. If any of you want to download it, it's worth downloading. It's what I just shot the Diesel campaign on, so you can have a look. Megaphoto does things that, you know, really weren't we couldn't obtain without sitting in a kind of post-production suite next to somebody who's getting paid £300 an hour. And now you can do it on an app. Yeah. I mean, the things you can do now on your iPhone, really, I mean, there's so much you can do. And I like that. That frees photography up, or frees image making up. So I think it's totally beneficial. It means all of you can have cameras, or all of you can take images and create images. And the web means that you don't have to go through a middle person. You don't have to wait for Alexander Schulman at British Vogue to say, yes, you can publish in our magazine. Publish what you want. Say what you want. And if you're not saying anything interesting, then nobody's going to listen to you. And if you're saying something brilliant, then people will see it. So I think it's a great democratization of image making. I think it's brilliant. I was sick and tired of the old system. It was slow and boring and corrupt. And I think it's great to have a new system. I think there's an awful link between magazines and advertising. I think that what we see in magazines is so controlled by the advertisers. I think there's an awful link between fashion journalism and advertising. I think we don't hear what people really think about the fashion shows other than on SHOWstudio, because nobody dares. And we ask people to come to the panels to go to SHOWstudio. A lot of people say, no, I can't, because I really couldn't say that about Calvin Klein, because they take out all this advertising in the magazine. Exactly. And that's corrupt, and I don't like that.
It is totally corrupt, and the fashion business has agreed and gone all the way along with it. It was started by the magazines, and now everybody, they say, oh, you can't say that, you know.
So I don't, is it
even in newspapers,
Ashley asked the question. Who asked the question? Ashley, was it?
Ashley did, yes.
Ashley, well, I don't know if that's answered your question, Ashley.
I think it has.
Got off track somewhere. But
I think it has, but I want to ask you a question that comes out of that, really. Are we saying that eventually photography will be much more accessible to anybody because it won't cost so much money to set it all up? Do you need a studio anymore?
No.
Does a photographer need a studio?
Well, a photographer never really hasn't since sort of the 1930s needed a studio.
So why do they always have them?
Well, you don't need a studio. It's good to have one if you want to do that sort of photography, but street photography has been going since Munkaski arrived from Hungary or wherever it was in the 1930s and took over from Steichen and Brannel de Meyer back in Vogue in the 1930s. So, you know, he freed up photography from the studio. Then you have people like Bert Stern and a lovely French photographer, actually no, he's American, William Klein actually.
William Klein.
Who took, you know, the small camera and took it out into the streets, and that became the big 60s thing. So, you know, then Bourdain, Newton, Bruce Weber, they were never studio photographers. It's only actually recently, well not recently, it's only really, I've become a studio photographer in the last 30 years because it became the place I kept going back to because I liked the fact there was nothing in it. If you go outside and start photographing outside, you know, there's everything going on. And I needed to simplify things down.
Yeah.
So I became a studio photographer.
Part of the simplification could be black and white. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen a black and white Nick Knight picture, have I? Would I have?
Yes. Yeah, well, Skinhead was all black and white.
I know, that was a long time ago.
Yohji Yamamoto's black and white. Yeah, you have them.
Well, no, Yohji had colour as well.
The first catalogues were all black and white, other than the red bus.
Oh, were they? All right. Which do you actually prefer?
Doesn't make any difference.
Really?
No, it doesn't make difference. No. I mean, I don't prefer one or the other. I mean, you use, it's horses for courses, that expression. You know, you use the right thing to say the right thing. You know, if you need the impact or drama of a certain sort of black and white, then you use it. But I don't have a preference for it. It's sort of putting the cart before the horse. First you have to work out what you're saying, and then you work out what's best to say it with.
Yeah.
And how do you go about working out what it is that you're wanting to say? Obviously, you know, you've done so many different campaigns and worked with, you know, so many different, you know, designers and stylists and what. How do you sort of, in a way, I mean, what's very interesting about your work is that it's very iconic and you can recognise it, but you can see that you're responding to different situations. So what's your sort of process?
Well, there isn't much of a process, Francis. It's really I see it more as relationships. So it tends to be the need of that relationship. When people like Yohji Yamamoto or Alexander McQueen or John Galliano or Jill Sander, whoever it is, or Gareth Pugh, you know, the relationships that you've got involved in, sort of a mutual love in any case. I mean, I only really work with the people that you really, really love. So whether it's Bjork or Gaga or Kanye, you have to have some sort of deep empathy with what they do to really understand what they do and to sort of see life through their eyes. So the process is, it's a relationship. And every relationship is different and every process is different. It depends what they need, what they're asking me for. You know, what Kanye will ask me will be very different from what Yoji asked me, what Gaga asked me, very different from what John Galliano asked me. And they're all different people, and you see things in them, you see different things in them.
So I mean, it's a very creative and challenging set of relationships. As you say, I mean, obviously the fact that
none of them are easy.
No, I was going to say, all the people that you've listed are really, they're all really demanding.
Didn't pick relationships well, did I? They're all very demanding. Yeah. I do like that in my relationships. Don't I, Charlotte?
Of course.
Anyway, but no, they're all very demanding relationships. But you want something you can invest your heart into and your soul into and be completely fulfilled.
But by being demanding like that, you're feeding each other's creativity, aren't you?
Yes. Well, I can't imagine describing to you anything more fulfilling than working with somebody like Alexander McQueen or John Galliano. I mean, these are people whose world is so rich. Without sounding stupid, I felt so honoured to be part of that vision. For Alexander McQueen needing me to express his vision. That's an honour and a real pleasure more than an honour, I guess. Honour sounds a bit too humble. But it was a deep, deep pleasure to be involved with those people. And I seek out people whose work I love, because otherwise there's no point. I don't think life's too short and these relationships are too demanding to go into them lightly. So I enjoy investing my heart and soul into them.
And what about, you referenced the Diesel campaign. What about something like that? Because that's a different sort of relationship.
It's the beginning of a relationship. Yeah. And there's two things with Diesel. You have a relationship with Nicola Formichetti and everything that he brings. Yeah. I used to know Nicola when he was with Gaga. And then you have the company of Diesel. And let's see what they want to do. So it's the beginning of a relationship, sort of tentative steps, see where it goes. But you're right, not everything I do is a full, deep relationship like it has been with some of the people like John or Lee or whoever. You often get into smaller moments, and also there's a realistic thing that I have to earn a living somehow.
Sure. Yeah. So you have to take commercial things that you are not necessarily excited about to
begin
with.
I would never take anything I'm not excited about.
Really?
But I wouldn't, I would be silly just to sort of make some sort of claim that everything I do for another. It's true, we work with other people and you work on different ways.
And the money wouldn't excite you. Well, that wouldn't be the catalyst.
The money's an important part of it. And I think you have to know your own worth. I worked for, about 10 years with Longcomb. And I know that during that time I made them billions of dollars. Not just millions, but billions. Yeah. So I have to know my worth within that equation. And it's a white cream, or it's a black cream, or it's a mascara. I'm not doing down their product, but without an image associated to that product, it doesn't sell. Yeah. So I know my worth within that equation. And those, but again, I invest in my heart and soul into Longcomb, believe it or not. Because it's important. It's important that the message that goes out, even if it's just a photograph of a bottle or a rose or whatever it is, that it has some integrity to it. And I tried to do that.
And of course, because the things you're actually photographing in that case are so banal, it's a challenge for you to lift them into something which will stop
not really
someone
banal.
flicking over.
I mean, they're not. I mean,
well, bottle's pretty banal, isn't it?
Well, all those... not banal, all those packagings, somebody spent ages working those out. And the cream has all been tested and all, so it's as banal as you make it. I mean, a car's banal, but it's not if you invest your time into it. It's a whole thing that I always believe that everybody should be considered beautiful because it's what the photographer, what the image maker sees in them. And it's that, everybody has a beauty within them. So you should be able to say, well, everything. If you care enough about something, you can make it look amazing. And it's the same with photographing people. If you see somebody, you'll always see something incredible in them. Be it the sparkle in their eye, the glint of their silver hair, whatever it is, their fine white nail. You just have to pick out the bits you like.
Quite. Yeah. You're obviously familiar with the work of Diane Arbus. How would what you've said just there fit in with her approach to the people she chose to photograph?
I don't know that much personally about Diane Arbus. I obviously know her work well. It's one of the photographers that you first see and first get enormously moved by. She committed suicide.
She did.
So, I would have thought she invested herself into her subjects. She saw things and maybe that made it unable for her to deal with life. I don't know. I don't know. I'm really sorry, but I don't know that much about the reasons Diane Arbus took her own life. In my life, I've had Lee McQueen kill himself, Isabella Blow kill herself. Yeah. So your suicide is something that runs reasonably close to the surface in what I do. So I'm not saying that therefore I know everything about it, but one can it's not totally alien. I was having a conversation at SHOWstudio today about actually we should do something on mental health within the creative industry. How close is creativity to instability mentally? You know, how one is pushed and one pushes oneself to go into a sort of place mentally, you know, which you want to be susceptible to everything. Before I go into a shoot, I purposely get myself into a mental state where I'm very susceptible, so I'm very aware of things.
How do you actually do that?
Well, it's hard to describe, Colin, but you need to be able to see things that aren't there. So you need to get, when I'm taking the photograph, I don't see the moment the shutter goes off because it goes black. And I don't, or the flash goes off and my retina couldn't process that much light. So I'm guessing, you never see, photography I argue, or image making I can argue, has never really been about seeing, it's about being about feeling. If I was taking your photograph, I'd be waiting for the moment and trying to predict the moment. It's about intuition, it's about perception, it's about the future. So I'm waiting for something and I'm trying to encourage it to happen. So I don't see it, I feel it and desire it. So photography is about, or image making is about desire. And that's, I completely lost my track now. So how do I get into that state?
Yes.
I think it's just a question of, you know, like
Well, you've
anybody
explained
does.
how you do it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad I've answered that.
I'm going to ask another question from the floor. This is Harriet Cookendon. Sorry, what? Wait. I'm going to get cold. What is the relevance of analogue in a truly digital age?
None.
Is that it?
Yep.
Would you like to
Oh,
tell
was
us
it
a little
Harriet?
more?
Was Harriet was asked it? Who's
Yes,
Harriet?
it
Is
was.
Harriet here?
It was Harriet.
No, we can't see
Is
Harriet.
Harriet around?
She
If so,
do
she can
something
stand
else.
up.
Yeah, she is.
Oh, hi, Harriet.
There's Harriet.
I'll try and answer your question better for you. What's the question?
I'll read again. What
the
is the relevance of analogue in a truly digital age?
Well, it's you know, it's back to, it's almost sound like the first question, Harriet. I don't think there is. I think photography, if we're talking about that, was a medium that existed 30 years ago. It has morphed and changed, and now actually it's stopped changing and it's got retrogressive. And a lot of people say things like, that's not a real photograph, you know, and that I think is really bad, because there's a new medium that's coming along, that is here, which pulls on lots of different things. And that's a new exciting medium. It's a medium that you all use without even thinking about it. None of you, I would suggest, use photography really anymore. And so we're talking about photography by saying an analog age. I don't think it has any relevance now, very, very little relevance. One might love it, but it's not relevant. It's not what we do. It's not what we speak with. It's not where we're seen anymore. Photography was about silver. This is about phosphorus. It glows from the screen. It's a different thing. It's just got just as much beauty, if not more. And it's got the power to get through to millions more people. You know, British Vogue has a circulation of 180,000. You know, I go online now. If I take an Instagram picture of you now, it'll go to 500,000. So, you know, we're not talking the same thing anymore. So I think it's just holding people back. I think this is such a super exciting medium that's growing from all the digital age now. And I think to try and constrict that by an old medium like photography does it a disservice and does what you can do a disservice. So that's why I'm quite adamant in the fact of saying photography is great, finished, let's move on.
And what about the use of the digital, whatever, whether it's, as you say, it's Instagram or whatever it is, whatever sort of medium that you're using, Mega Photo or whatever the app is, or sorry, yeah. I mean, what is it about the process of actually working with something which is the glowing? It has a different sort of relationship. What are you looking for in terms of making what you would consider to be a successful image? As you say, everybody here, everybody takes images all the time. And as you said earlier, people post things up, and what is good is going to, be something that really excites and makes people want to look at it and to follow that person. Yeah. What would you say are the sort of real creative constraints or possibilities?
When I'm creating an image, what I'm looking for is a harmonious sound, so if that makes any sense to you. When you're composing an image in the back of your camera, if you work that way, you're waiting for all the elements to start to play off each other to make a harmonious sound in my head. That's what I'm waiting for. So again, so I have a slight problem with the idea of photography being about sight. It's not, for me, it's about sound. I mean, this is where we talked a little bit about mental illness and where the crossover point is between being mentally unstable and being creative. If I'm feeling that when I create an image, that means I'm probably synesthetic in some way. I mix up my senses. It's like tasting colour and all that sort of stuff, which I don't have profoundly, but I do know that when I'm creating an image in that way, I'm looking for the shapes to fall into place, and it starts to make a harmonious sound. So that's what I'm looking for, if you want, pragmatically. To get myself into that state, which you asked earlier on, I tend to pace up and down. So I walk
Actually,
up
you
and
are
down.
a pacer.
I am.
Yes, you do.
And it's just the repetitive movement puts yourself into that sort of thing. So yeah, there are physical ways one does it, and I've often thought it's quite interesting to analyse the sort of, A, the psychology behind a photo shoot, and B, also the sort of physiology and the sort of, the way we physically deal with it. So a lot of it's about performance.
Yes.
I find myself, I hadn't noticed until I started seeing myself on film, but I find myself standing in front of Carly Kloss, pulling the same poses she does. And luckily, I don't have to look at myself doing that. But then, that's what you do. You sort of physically imitate the model. You physically push and twist and everything else until it all starts to go. And I just say it is the most amazing feeling when you start to take imagery and you start to take photographs in a session. It all feels awful. The first picture comes out, everybody sees it on the screen, everybody goes, "Phew, it's not so good." They start mumbling in the back of the room, and I realise that I haven't done a good job yet. And there's always that you want to just get it finished because and it's actually terrifying taking somebody's photograph. It's always a difficult thing because if I was taking your photograph, you'd expect me to take a good picture of you. And the first one that comes out, you wouldn't look great, and I wouldn't have made you look how you want to look, and all those sorts of things. So it's quite a good process to take you back down to zero. It makes you a bit more humble because you're going to fail in front of somebody, whether it's Carly Kloss or Colin or whoever it is, whether it's Gaga or whoever. The first images that are going to come out probably aren't very good. And so you have to face failure straight away, which is quite good. I quite like that. It's sort of humbling, and that's when and then you start to build again.
If you were taking my photograph, I would be very humble, and I'd assume that you would produce a marvellous picture. But what about people like Gaga, say, who are very image conscious? They've been photographed, no doubt, by other photographers.
Yeah.
How do you find, do they try to impose a particular look that they want you to capture? Or how does it happen? Is there a rapport?
Yes, there's a lot of talking that goes on
Yeah.
beforehand, during, and whatever. Gaga is the most incredible woman to photograph because she just goes off. I mean, literally, you can't keep up. When I photographed the Born This Way series of pictures, was it Born This Way? Born This Way series of pictures. It literally, she appeared in front of the camera, and she just went from I don't know, 3 in the afternoon until 3 the following morning, and you're just literally trying to keep up. As she's changing and moving and taking clothes off and putting clothes on, and the clothes is dressing her, and she's got slime on her, and she's got slime off her, and a wig comes on, a wig comes off, and that goes on for 10 hours, and you're literally just photographing as much as you can, or image capturing, or whatever we want to call it. Chloe, who used to assist me here, can testify that it's something that you literally. We used for that all that Born This Way session. We used nearly all of it. We used a ring light or ring flash, which actually is a square box which the camera lens goes through. It gets so hot that the assistant Laura, in fact, who was holding it, had to wear gloves because it would burn her hand. Because I looked down into the camera and burn my head on it every so often, which kind of keeps me awake. But it's a physical thing. You might as well be wrestling with her. I mean, it really is physical. She will just go, and you just have to keep up. So that's great. I'm not, if I was photographing you, I wouldn't expect you to do that.
Thank God for that.
You might surprise me,
Thank God for that.
but I'd expect you to be able to keep up.
But that must be terribly exciting for you.
It is.
Because you're being challenged, really, aren't you, all the time? How many times does she change? Or anyone? Suppose you were doing Judi Dench or somebody like that. How often do they bring
Judi
lots
Dench.
of clothes?
Oh,
I'm thinking of someone who's
it's always
opposite,
different.
you know?
It's always different depending. It just depends on what they're doing it for. Gaga wanted to do a whole series of images to launch the Born This Way, album and songs and everything else. So we were doing as much as we possibly could in a space of time. So she would have changed. I don't know. I mean, it's an ongoing. It's like watching a performance piece. I mean, Nicola Formichetti and Anna Trevelyan were dressing her, and stuff was coming from Void, of course, and was coming off, and it's literally like watching a kind of performance, not watching a performance piece, but being in a performance piece. And I love it when it's like that.
I'm sure you do. It sounds exciting just hearing it, doesn't it?
I mean, it was. It's she's not Gaga by chance.
No, exactly. Do you think you'd be able to what should we say, have that feeling if there were cameras, movie cameras, taking you doing that, or would that destroy the whole magic?
No. Well, I always have done since the late 80s. Somebody said to me, you should film this, Nick. You should actually film what's going on in your studio. And so since the late 80s, I've had a camera. It was a very antiquated old camera in the 80s. It was just a video camera stuck on a tripod, and I say to the people I'm photographing, you're being, well, I don't say it anymore because it's bloody obvious, but I say you're being filmed as a movie camera, as a film camera of the UK, and everybody, other than Twiggy and David Bowie, said, yes, that's fine. And it just films everything like a fly on the wall. And I've got now 30 years of it is of kind of, you know,
Amazing.
what happened in front of my camera. And now, well, since SHOWstudio, where we broadcast things live, so now it becomes about, you know, actually serving the performance up to the public, you know, in live, in real time. So it's just sort of scratched up a little bit. So in that way I perform, and these are performances, and very incredible things happen. It's why I started SHOWstudio. It's because I thought what was being shown in the fashion world wasn't as interesting as what I was seeing. I was seeing the kind of the whole of the, I mean, it came back to this, there was a moment I was photographing a very young Naomi Campbell, I guess she was 16, 17, and she was, she'd just been, like, probably going to be completely wrong about this, but just been dating Prince, I'm guessing. Anyway, he'd given her a tape of his latest songs, and she was playing Prince, and she had a beautiful scarlet croton from Yohji Yamamoto, and she was dancing in front of the camera and moving around, and the flash was going off, and every time she moved, the flash froze the shape of the coat, and I had a tungsten light on her, so that sort of blurred the inside of it, so you got these sort of just big, huge, painterly abstracts going off in front of you to the sound of Prince, and it being Naomi, you know. And I thought, oh, there's 3 people seeing this. And over the photographs at the end of it, and it's great, but the rest of the stuff you just don't see. So I thought, Christ, and then you start to see how fashion's reflected in the press, and the press just scandalised and trivialised the whole thing. I thought, no, it's not about bulimic, anorexic, paedophilicness. I mean, sure, there is that in it, but there's that in ballet, there's that in theatre, that in politics, that in every walk of life, sadly, but it's there. So it isn't predominant in fashion. And actually, it's not about the sort of mundane, Rich and Judy, how to put your makeup on. You know, it's actually so much more exciting than that. So I started SHOWstudio with just a sort of desire to say to people, look, this is, actually, it's much more exciting than what you're being fed.
What are you going to do with all these ones that you've taken over the years? I mean, will you edit them and present them in some way eventually?
I don't know, Colin. That's something to work out when we get there. At the moment, they just go into an archive, and they're just there in an archive. Occasionally we dip back in, occasionally.
Right, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask another one from the floor. This is Harun Gula, or Jula, I'm not sure. I apologise if I've mispronounced it. And it's on the same sort of lines as the other ones. How do you see the future of fashion, film and photography? That's a big one.
You're like steam engines, they sit in, that's how I see the future of photography. I don't see the future of photography very clearly. I think, as I've said, I think it's a medium that was beautiful and great and fantastic and relevant to a certain generation or set of generations. I don't think it is anymore. I think the future of fashion, the future of photography, probably is some interesting moment we can do, you know, when we want to study something that doesn't happen anymore. The future of fashion is with you guys. That's you lot. It's in your hands. It's really, you know, you are the most exciting thing that we have at the moment for fashion is what you're going to do, whether it's photography or whether it's image making or filmmaking or designing or whatever it is. That you're the future of fashion. What's the future of film?
Yes.
I think it was.
Fashion, film and photography.
I think fashion film is becoming what the fashion photography used to be for the magazines. I think the internet is what the magazines were, but much better. The fashion film shows a garment in movement, and I think every garment that's been created was always created to be seen in movement. So the idea that fashion photography sort of compromised that vision to some degree is true, and I think if that vision needn't be compromised, either the fashion garment can be seen in movement, that's better for it, better for understanding the designer's visions, and therefore I think that it's inevitable that fashion film will become the predominant medium for showing fashion. It isn't there yet, but we're, 10 years or so into the creation of fashion film. If you take a similar sort of period back in 10 years since the beginning of fashion photography, you're back in, it started roughly in 1910 when Vogue, American Vogue, I guess it was just one Vogue then, Vogue put 2 photographers to work in Vogue to take over from fashion illustration. It was Steichen and Baron Adolf de Meyer. Steichen was a sort of art photographer, if you want, a friend of Stieglitz. They famously fell out over fashion. Baron Adolf de Meyer was more like a Maratestino type character, very social. So you had those, but for 10 years, you think about 1920, how fashion photography looked. It doesn't look like the art form that we knew, which was defined more or less by 1960 or 70, with people like Penn and Avedon and Stern and Bailey and Bourdain, Newton. They sort of defined fashion photography as how you imagine it. It's not about a gentleman in the putting a hood over himself and looking at a camera. It was about, what do you imagine fashion photography? Steve Meisel or whatever it is.
Yeah,
so that's how fashion photography was. So it took 50 or 60 years for fashion photography to become a medium, so I don't see why we think that fashion film should do it straight away. We have awful examples of fashion film at the moment, some awful examples, and some brilliant things that are coming out. There's some great fashion filmmakers, people like Ruth Hogburn are doing amazing things, and with her work with Gareth Pugh. So there's really exciting things happening in fashion film, and I think it will become, the medium of the internet is probably where we all see fashion now. We don't see it in magazines. It's the main medium to see it is on the internet, and therefore you have to find something that works in that medium. And the way that the photograph worked in the magazine so beautifully and fantastically is the way that the film works on the internet so beautifully and fantastically.
I mean, the other thing that's very interesting, because obviously fashion allows so much in terms of collaboration, even if it's just constructing a garment. But it seems like the possibilities with fashion film for collaboration, because obviously you have so many elements that you're pulling together. I mean, is that something that you talked about Naomi Campbell and, the clothes, and there's you, and there's the music, and so on. And that sense of movement.
It's a romantic setting
But it's in the way, it's sort of taken, I mean, the way that there's all the elements that you have and can construct within a film. Do you see that as part of what's possible? Because you've done some great collaborations.
Yes.
And how you capture that and that sense of movement and engagement and exploration.
I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, actually, Frances,
right.
but I might be answering it. Film is a much bigger medium in terms of the number of people you need on set. So when I was making a film for Christian Dior of Charlize Theron for the perfume J'adore in LA 7 or 8 years ago, there were 70 people needed on set. Now, if I was going to make the same film, I'd need 3, if that. So that's changed, and so that's an enormous. That's the question was asking about how fashion film, or perhaps film in general, should change. I mean, we are living through the most exciting times. It's so accessible to us now, which it never really was before. I mean, it's awful. There is a revolution happening, and we're not aware of it. And there's also, 67 people unemployed through that equation. And the film industry fight that. If we work in film now, what normally happens is say, okay, well, you need this, and you see the list of stuff that comes back. You think, no, I don't. I need this.
Yeah.
That's all I need now. And I don't need loads of light. This thing takes photographs, film, whatever you want, in the lowest of light levels. I've just finished a book, which we did on Isabella Blow. We photographed Daphne Guinness, collected all of her collection, and we photographed it all in Isabella Blow's ancestral home in Doddington over 4 days, 60 outfits, which is an incredible rate. And it was all on the iPhone.
Really?
And that's the book being published as we speak by Rizzoli. So film is the same. I mean, again, going back to this fantastically bad app called Megaphoto. It's you can do things on that you couldn't do before. You really don't need it. And there's a sort of, I'm slightly suspicious of the film world. I'm not surprised, but I'm slightly suspicious of them, because you don't need those 70 people anymore. And that, in human terms, that's tragic, because there are 67 people who are not needed.
But in terms of, obviously for a lot of our students, the idea that, you can get up and make a film, you don't need 70 people. I mean, it's also incredibly liberating, isn't it?
Because absolutely. That's my end point.
I mean, and
it is liberating, really, but these big, huge changes that we are living through come with a cost, a human cost. And there's those 67 people. And of course, those 67 people will fight it tooth and nail. And so will all the journalists on the front row of the fashion shows. And they will all say to you, no, you have to be here to see the clothes.
Here's one from Kwangbok Lee, who says, do you consider yourself a photographer, an artist, or both?
I never really, we've done the whole photography, image making thing. There's no point in going over that again. Whether it's art or not, in a way I really don't care. It doesn't make any difference to what I do. It won't make my job any easier this coming weekend or tomorrow. It implies that photography should be called art because that's a sort of step up. I really don't care. And B is no, of course it is. Art is about communication. In fact, art should be renamed communication, and that's all it's about. It's about somebody communicating to other people what they think about the world. And that's really all it is, whether it's sculpture, painting, singing, theatre, opera, whatever it is. It's that feeling that you've got something to say and you want to communicate. You communicate it through painting or through photography or through film or through whatever you want. That's communication, and art falls into that. So it's really about communication. I've always thought of what I do as communication. So whether it's art or not, I don't care. And I don't, in a way, I don't like the debate because it sort of automatically positions what I do under art as if I wanted to be above it. It's sort of, you see, there's a sort of different difficultness in the question.
What about, you do, I suppose you would call it your own personal work. You do marvellous photographs of flowers, rather like Irving Penn did with his tulips years ago. What are they about? Because they're so separate from something like Lady Gaga, or maybe they're not in your mind.
Well, they're not. They're the same. They're just me expressing myself, the love I have of what I find it beautiful and incredible in the whole thing of flowers, which I've done in different ways. I produced a series of a book called Flora, which is pressed flower specimens from the Natural History Museum, which Charlotte and I spent 3.5 years of our life going through 6.5 million samples.
Oh wow, did you?
Which is great fun. And you go through swathes and swathes and swathes, day after day of brown twigs, and then all of a sudden you find a cactus flower, or just a grass that's been pressed and looks incredible, or you find a algae, which you really would never think that anybody could have
make
created.
It up, as they
you
say.
couldn't make it up, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just joy. And of course, I tend to think that it's a bit me relaxing. So when I'm not photographing whoever or for whatever, then I'll photograph things that don't talk to me.
Well, exactly. They don't talk to you. They don't have tantrums.
They will quite often, and they
will.
stay in place.
They will. That's true.
They will. Which actually is the same as the people in front of my camera.
Yes, well, I suppose. Right. Well, we're moving on quite well. So let's look at another one. Amy George wants to know, what advice would you give to an aspiring fashion photographer? That's very important for these people.
Trust yourself. There is a questioner here.
Amy, are you here?
Oh, hi, Amy.
There's Amy.
What advice would I give you? Well, to trust yourself, really, to trust your vision, to know that you have something nobody else has at all, and that's what people want from you. They've already got me, and they're probably sick of me, and they want something new, and that's what you have. That's what you all have. You all have yourselves, and so you have to trust that you are the best thing, that it is about the fact that you've got something nobody else has got. So don't try and imitate anybody else. I mean, of course, we all get influenced by other people, and we all look at other people's work and think that's fantastic, and it's a little bit like trying on somebody else's clothes, and they really don't fit after a while, so you end up finding what you really want yourself. But just it's that trust. It's that not letting anybody say you're wrong. Well, they'll say it, but don't believe them. Just be sure that you're right, and it's your way, and your way is the best way. So that's advice I'd give you, if that's of any help.
Well, it's marvellous help for everybody, because really it's damn good advice for life as well. Whether you're taking a photograph or whatever you're doing.
I mean, enough people will tell you you're wrong, you shouldn't do it that way.
Oh, well, that's the great catalyst, isn't it? If they say you're wrong, then you're determined to prove that you're right. Or maybe that's
Depending
just
on
me.
what sort of person you are, Colin.
Well, I'm that sort of person. I'm very confrontational, certainly. Right, let's quickly move on to Rachel. Rachel Stanley, who says, and this is what I knew was coming, of course, who has been your favourite person to photograph?
Don't look at me with big blue eyes.
Rachel wants to know, who has been your favourite person to photograph and why?
Rachel, where are you? Oh, hi,
Where's
Rachel.
Rachel down front?
Who's been my favourite person to photograph? That's a really not easy question to answer because there's always so many people you photograph, and they're all fantastic, going right back from when I used to take pictures of my dad to taking pictures of skinheads to, I mean, everything you do with the same commitment. There isn't really, one could say, Gemma Ward was incredible to photograph. The girl was just, the most beautiful person. I remember the first time I saw her, she walked out of the changing rooms, and I was gobsmacked by her beauty. It was just incredible. She looked almost completely otherworldly. And not all, there are lots of great models I work with, and not all models look otherworldly. But Gemma, when she walked out, looked otherworldly. And I could have photographed Gemma till the cows come home, if nobody else. I remember her once, and she was an incredibly bright girl as well. her father or mother was a doctor. And she wanted to be an actress. I think she is sort of going through the process of becoming an actress. I mean, I don't know how much you know about Gemma, but she was with Heath Ledger when he committed suicide. So obviously that had some effect on her. She's no longer in the fashion business, so to speak, so she's trying to be an actress. But I remember I put Gemma Ward in a mirrored room. We used to have at the old SHOWstudio, we used to have a lobby you'd have to cross, and the lobby was mirrored on the floor, the ceiling, the walls, everything else. In fact, it was very disabilitating. I remember I had to help Vivienne Westwood across it because she wouldn't cross it without me holding her hand. So it was a very strange place. So I put Gemma Ward in there, put the camera behind a sort of two-way panel, and said to Gemma, and she is the most beautiful girl in the world, if you want, look at yourself as if you hate how you look. And of course, a lot of the models that we see in the magazines are people who had a very hard time because of their physicality when they were young, when they're early teens. So I said, look at yourself as if you hate yourself. And she did, and she beat her fist against that glass until they bled. So that was the sort of model that Gemma was. So for an image maker, working with somebody like that, it's incredible because you're being given so much stuff. I did a series of photographs of people with very severe physical disabilities, one of which is Amy Mullins, who then opened one of the Alexander McQueen shows. Amy is a para-athlete. She was born with no bone in the lower part of her leg, and for her first birthday they cut off her legs from the knee down. And she has had these you've probably all seen that, but it's sort of spoon-shaped, like the cheetah's leg running. And she was one of the first people to have these legs, and she was a para-athlete. Consequently, she had the most incredible physique. You know, her bottom was the most incredible-looking bottom you've ever seen because she had to move her legs a different way. And she is incredibly bright and very, very, very plucky. Would do anything. Would always go the extra mile, much further than anybody else who had two legs would do. So those sorts of shoots are exciting, exhilarating, and also when you're photographing people with incredibly pronounced physical disabilities, if you want to call them disabilities, there's a whole readjustment. If you're photographing somebody who's got no arms, first thing you do is you go and shake hands, of course it's wrong. It's all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot, and I like the idea that I lose control. I like the idea that I'm no longer reliant on all those sort of things that we kind of socially work out how to do. And you go into that situation and you're immediately out of your depth and you make all the social mistakes that you think you're going to make. But I like that. I like that thing. So those shoots become very, very important emotionally. But there are so many people that I photographed who are great and who are interesting, and sometimes you don't realise until afterwards, how good they've been. So it's not an easy. I couldn't really say, oh, it's definitely that session with so and so. There are A, so many, and B, to be honest, the best person I photograph will be the person I photograph next. So it's always the future, it's never really the past. So I don't really look at my work in that sort of way. And if I look at my work as a communication, it's like saying to you, what's the best thing you've ever said? It's like, well, I don't know. Does that sound okay at the time? But no longer because I've said it now. So that's a bit how I look at my work. I'm much more interested in what I'm going to do next, be it tomorrow or be it in half an hour, than I am in what I did yesterday or 10 years ago. So, but I have had the luck, privilege, or whatever you want to see it, of photographing amazing people. People who are really challenging, because that's what I'm drawn to, and that's obviously what we're drawn to, because we all go to things, which excite us.
I mean, one of the other things, obviously, just not in terms of people who you photograph, but also who you work with. I mean, you do these great collaborations as well. It's very much what I think about SHOWstudio. I often think it's the things that you're running, it's the experiments that you're doing, it's the work that you're getting somebody to do from a whole range of different sort of backgrounds and aspects of the industry. Again, what are you looking for when you're inviting people to do that, or again, I would assume it's another sort of relationship that you're working on in terms of what they bring. But because again, they're very particular, I think, the sort of experiments almost that you do.
Now, what are you talking about there, Franz? Give me an example so I understand what you're talking about.
Well, I just think, people, things like the horse piece, where you dismembered.
Oh, right.
That for
yes,
example.
that one, yeah.
Or thinking about Bjork, for example, the piece. So it's sort of, what are you thinking about when you're doing these pieces, which are about fashion,
well,
but
the horse
also
piece
about other things?
was a 2 or 3 day live performance around couture, where I was working for W magazine and photographing the couture, and I wanted to contextualise it within the sort of the world that couture lives in. And so the horse piece, as you mentioned, we had a dead horse brought from the tannery, which would have been skinned in any case, but we got it skinned in front of the live cameras. So at the end of the shoot, we had a beautiful model called was it a Lucci? I think it was Lucci. It was a beautiful model. Lucci was modelling all the stuff. And in between her, when she'd changed from kind of Gautier into Dior, we'd do a sort of piece, a sort of scene set. So we had the kind of live stock market, the kind of NASDAQ going, showing all the different, LVMH taking over the Pinot Group and buying. So that was playing on the screen whilst she was modelling Dior. And then it occurred to me that people don't really associate. They don't, they see, 100 pairs of pony skin boots walking up the runway. Do they realise it's 100 ponies? And so I thought, well, if you take a horse and you skin it, that's what you're doing. So I'm not sitting on the fence because I don't have any thought on it, but I don't think necessarily it's my role within that to say you should or you shouldn't. So I just said, this is what it is. If you're happy with that, then that's what it is. But at least you should know what it looks like when you take a huge horse, hang it up by two legs, and then slit it and take the skin off it. That's what it looks like. I mean, it's fascinating, but morally, at least you should connect the two. I think there's an awful lot done, and you can take really horrible examples of this, but there's an awful lot done to make a distance between the reality of producing a garment, especially a garment that involves fur or skin, and what walks down a catwalk.
Right.
So, and what it really isn't. I don't think it was my job there to say yay or nay. But it's my job at least to show.
I think that is really important, because one of the biggest problems we've had in the last 10 years ago is the disconnect between the making and construction of clothes. So you can go out and buy everything so cheaply. There's a very long supply chain. There is no direct connection. I mean, if you understand what's behind the making of the pony boots, you're actually going to look after them and wear them.
It's any bit of horrible genocidal politics, really, isn't it? It's sort of the demonisation of the other.
It is.
I mean, it's a sort of you create another and then you can demonise it, or you put such a huge distance between the realities that they're no longer connected.
Have you ever been interested in going out to Bangladesh or somewhere and seeing the human cost and photographing the human cost of making clothes?
Yes,
which is
no.
It's just as horrific.
I don't actually. Yes and no, to be honest. Yes, I'd be interested, but it doesn't fit within the framework of what I do. And I can see the human cost of making clothes walking down Mottcombe Street every day.
Well, that's true.
So it's a slightly different angle on it. But no, I haven't been.
It's a
propelled
pity.
into that.
I'd love to see a portfolio of Nick Knight's pictures of clothes, how they're made. I think it'd be fantastic, and a really important historic document, in fact. Right, now we're getting very near the end of time. We've got time for perhaps 2 or 3 questions. Have we got roving mics? Ah, right. Well, that's a mistake. We'll have a right at the front one so we'll all hear.
Will you ever retire?
Do you hear that? Will he ever retire? We hope not.
Hello, Chloe, my assistant, Chloe. Ex-assistant, Chloe. Will I ever retire? No, I won't. So what would you retire to do? I mean, I absolutely love what I do. It doesn't mean it's easy, as you well know. And actually, most times one feels actually hate is a kind of fear, is actually a better way of describing it. But no, I don't know what I do. I would never want to take a holiday. I never watch any television. I don't get drunk. I don't do any of those things because they take away from what I want to do. So I can't see any point in retiring any more than I can do lying on the beach or going down a pub or watching television or anything, really. Because I'm doing what I want to do, so I can't work out a single reason to stop doing it, apart from my 3 children, who Charlotte and I have had 3 children, and of course, they became 3 single reasons to stop doing what I was doing, other than my kids. No.
Okay, yes.
In regards to fashion film and the trajectory that's going, do you think that the sort of constraint of watching something in real time and the amount of time that you have to commit to watching it, in addition to the sound involved, will sort of constrain that growth in a way that didn't constrain fashion photography? I
think it has to define itself, and it's going to take those. How much do you want to actually sit there and watch this? Is it an animated GIF? Is that what we're really looking at, or is it a kind of a minute-long film? Or is it a 10-minute long? I think those things are going to by trial and error. I tend to go towards a shorter film than a longer film, so I tend to kind of work within a sort of minute space. But then using the example of Ruth Hogben, who did the films for Gareth Pugh, they were 12 minutes, 17 minutes, and you watched them and you were engrossed, or personally, one felt engrossed for that time. And they worked over that, it was a whole collection. So they worked in that space. So I think it depends on what you're trying to articulate. I don't think it's defined itself. I think that's the fascinating thing about fashion film, is it really hasn't defined itself yet at all. It's really wide open. And we're 10 years into it, so it's embryonic almost. It's really in its infancy. It's just up to you to define it if you want to do it. No, I don't think there's any particular time set for it yet. I think what works, and as I say, it could be anything from 10 frames. I mean, that's moving fashion. And that's really all fashion film is about. It's about fashion moving. And that can be animated GIF, or, you know, it certainly isn't what Chanel are doing.
Okay, one last question at the front here.
Yeah, when was the last time you felt frustrated or anxious because of photography?
Was it outside that door just before I came in here? I was quite anxious at that point. Frustrated or anxious? You know, all the time. It's really, if I said it wasn't easy, it might sound glib, but it really isn't easy. Nobody teaches you how to get better. You get to a certain stage, and the only way you get better is to keep running at the wall, and keep doing it again and again and again. And it's, you know, so there's no. I've posed the question a couple of times, sort of through social medias. You know, how do I get better? I don't mean because I'm really good. That sounds awful. I mean, how do I improve myself? You know, where can I learn from? How can I do it? Well, become quicker, my perception quicker, my intuition quicker. How can I get my composition more strong? Yeah, all those sorts of. How do you do that? So it's very hard to know how to. What was your question? What was the last time it made me frustrated? And all the time. Yeah. You know, if I picked up this and tried to take your picture, which I promised sincerely I would do. You know, how to take a good picture, you know, it's about so many different things. I just do exactly what I just promised I would do to somebody, to take your picture. Not yours specifically, but yours generally. So there you go.
Smile.
Anyway, hold on. Now I just photographed my groin, which is even more interesting. So it's very frustrating all the time, because you don't know how to make it better. It's not something like running fast, which you can just keep on pushing and pushing and pushing. You know, it's a sort of metaphysical, psychological mixture of chance events. You know, it's a very strange beast. So I don't know how to get better at doing it. It's incredibly frustrating, because you can't rely on it, and it's wrong to rely on any system you set up. So I think there's a mistake that image makers tend to make, which is think, okay, so I did this in a certain way, and it was a big success, and I felt real satisfaction from doing it, and it got lots of applause, and everybody loved it, so I'll do that again. It's just the worst thing. You can imagine me having this whole conversation again. You know, how boring would that be? You might argue it wasn't that great the first time, but you know, you can't do it the same as you've done it before. So you're back down to zero. So every time you start to take another image, every time you try and take a photograph or create an image or whatever, you're back down to zero. And that, you know, but that's good, because then you don't rely, I think, on anything other than your instinct and other than the things that are going through you at that time. And it's your relationship with that person. And it's about that moment, and that's what makes it exciting, but terrifying, because I can't prepare for it. If I was a singer, I could sit at home in my garage and work out my songs and practice them in front of a mirror and then stand up here and do them. But you know, as a photographer or as an image maker, you can't do that. You have to, it has to be about that moment, about that particular moment, and you can't practice it. So it's very frustrating and really scary. I've sort of learned to balance that now, if you want to know. I'll just stop in a minute, by the way. I've sort of learned to balance it, because when I was first starting out, I would get really too nervous and be paralyzed with fear. I photographed Robert De Niro. I photographed Robert De Niro once for George magazine. Now, I'm almost saying none of you will know George magazine. Do you know George?
Right?
So yeah, Kennedy. Yes, oh, brilliant. There you go. Anyway, so I photographed. There was a magazine called George magazine, which is a political magazine started by Robert Kennedy, the junior. John Kennedy. Thank you. Sorry, I'm awful names. But I started by John Kennedy. So Robert Kennedy's John Kennedy's son. Get there in the end. George magazine, fantastic political magazine, started up in the middle of the 80s. Yeah. And one of the first covers I was asked to do, which was Robert De Niro, and I had to photograph Robert De Niro. So all of a sudden on the phone before the shoot, I get Robert Kennedy, Robert De Niro, Robert Kennedy. It's very strange. John Kennedy, Robert De Niro. So that was destabilizing, because you get these huge figures appearing on your phone, which is kind of odd. And then on a shoot, all of a sudden, I've got to take a photograph of Robert De Niro, and I'm looking at him. And I don't know how many of you know his films, but if you've ever seen Cape Fear or Taxi Driver, you know, you're looking into the eyes of a total psycho who's probably going to put a ballpoint pen in your head. So there's a certain amount of and I got so paralyzed by fear, the pictures were crap. I mean, they really weren't my best. And on top of that, George Magazine wanted to do this thing with George Washington, so Robert De Niro had to be dressed as George Washington. Robert De Niro wanted to promote his film Casino, where he stabbed somebody in the head with a ballpoint pen. So he would want to do something about gambling, and there I am caught in the middle of these two giants, thinking, you know, so I got absolutely terrified in rubbish pictures. And you can't go the other way. You can't become so relaxed and blasé and it doesn't matter and it's all fine, because then you're not performing. So you have to get that balance of really sharply tuned intuition and perception of seeing things. And so it's terrifying, but it's balancing that fear and also using that fear to, it's adrenaline within it that sort of makes your body work, makes your system work faster. So.
Well, I think you'll all agree that in the very nicest way, Nick's performed brilliantly tonight. And I would like you to join Francis and I in thanking him very much indeed in the usual way.